are not speaking, please mute your microphone, and you may also want to turn off your camera to help conserve on bandwidth. Thanks so much. We'll get started shortly.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. First thing I'd like to mention is this session is going to be recorded. So if you do not want to be recorded, now's your time to exit the webinar. What we're talking about today is Commongrounds. It's a cooperative in Traverse City, Michigan. And there's some really unique features about it that we want to share, and hopefully you can take back and use inside of your own communities. A little bit about the team that helped put this session together. Jim Wadsworth is our branch chief for the Cooperative Services branch inside of Rural Development Agency within USDA. Also speaking with you today is Margaret Bow, who is our Cooperative Development Specialist. Megan Moriarty, who is our Legal Policy Analyst. Myself, Debbie Roush, in the Loan and Grant Analyst with Cooperative Development Services, and Robbie Fauser-Fink, who will be monitoring the chat. If you would like a copy of the presentation afterwards, please put your name and email address in the chat, and we'll be able to get that to you. Also, the group that you're going to hear from Commongrounds, the collaborators are Kate Redmond and Andrew Lutz, who are the co-executive directors of Commongrounds Cooperative. Jeff Hickman, who is the Vice President of Government Lending for Coastal State Banks, who is one of the members that helped finance this project. And then Lisa Eppel, who is a business specialist, was housed in the Michigan State office and is now moved up into the national office. So with that, we'll kind of get started and get this rolling. One of the things that we hope you take away from the webinar today is that the cooperative business model is a valuable tool in your community economic development toolbox. Cooperatives are businesses that create local wealth by focusing on creation of margin that then they do that through a common set of values and principles to achieve their mission. The unique feature of a cooperative is that member owners determine how the margin will be used, and the cooperatives serve their membership while focusing on equity, equality, self-help, democracy, and solidarity. These are all characteristics that many people desire to have within their communities. And like communities, cooperatives come in many different shapes and sizes and are present through all industries in the U.S. and across the world. And what we want to share with you is, looking at rural communities, we're finding that they're increasingly diverse, that their economic development isn't reliant on smokestack type situations, and that rural communities vary a lot. So you need to look at the individual resources in your community and how you can capitalize on those. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret Bow. Oh, missed one thing. On the slides, anything that you see is underlined is a hyperlink. On this, there's a Rural America at a Glance, and that is a publication provided by Economic Research Service, and they produce that every year. Gives you a little bit of demographics of what rural America looks like, the things that are happening in situations out there. So wanted to provide that as access for you. And with that, I am going to now turn it over to Margaret Bow.
Thanks, Debbie. Wanted to share with you a thought about why cooperatives are formed. Traditionally, it has been more of a defensive strategy when there has been an unmet social or economic need, or there's some type of power or market imbalance going on within a system. But what we're seeing is that people are using the cooperative model to be proactive, to take ownership, for instance, with a community investment cooperative like we're going to look at today, Commongrounds Cooperative. an opportunity for the community to take ownership of a key parcel of land, something that's very important at the heart of the community. It's an opportunity to build wealth, and it's an opportunity to maintain control locally rather than outside investors having a say in what happens in your community. Next slide, please. Slides are being a little slow today. And here is a definition of a cooperative. It is an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. And if that sounds like it was written by a committee, you would be correct. It was put together back in the mid-1990s by, through consensus through the International Cooperative Alliance. And that group, the ICA group, is revisiting the definition as we speak. But the next slide, we wanted to share with you a shorthand definition that we at USDA Cooperative Services came up with several years ago. And we can call it the user-owned, user-controlled, and user-benefit thought system. Cooperatives are owned by the people who use the cooperative, who finance the cooperative. It's democratically controlled, one member, one vote, regardless of how much investment you may have in the cooperative, regardless of how much you may use the cooperative in a year. And the benefits go back to member owners in proportion to how much they use that cooperative in the previous year, a concept called patronage. And if we go on to the next slide, I'm going to give a very brief introductory definition of what is the concept of patronage. From an accounting and legal perspective, that concept of patronage is one of the defining elements of a cooperative business. And it's basically a system of sharing the co-op's net margins, another word for profits, with the owners in proportion to use. So every year, the board of directors of the cooperative, and the board of directors is comprised of members who are elected by their peers, fellow members within the cooperative. They will review the financials of the cooperative and decide how much they wish to allocate on behalf of the cooperative to reserves for the benefit of the cooperative, for a rainy day fund, for future investment, and how much they want to pay out to member owners in proportion to how much they use the co-op in the previous year. So for a producer co-op, such as farmers, patronage would be based on how much was delivered in the previous year to the cooperative. I am based in Wisconsin. We have a lot of dairy co-ops here, so it's in proportion to how much fluid milk was delivered to your cooperative. If you're a consumer co-op, it's about how much product or services you used of the cooperative in the previous year. And if it's a worker co-op, it tends to be the number of hours worked. So next slide, please. And I will turn it over to Megan Moriarty, who will give us a little more perspective.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to go through my slides very quickly because I know we want to hear from the cooperative itself. I'll be focusing on how cooperatives are eligible for the BNI program. Some of this information might be useful when you're talking to your USDA Rural Development State Office person. So let's say a cooperative is organized in Michigan, like Commongrounds Cooperative. Under the BNI regulations, let's look at whether it's an eligible borrower. The regulations say that a cooperative organized and operated on a for-profit or nonprofit basis can be eligible. I just want to make a very quick point of clarification. State statutes sometimes designate a cooperative as a nonprofit. There are separate federal designations under the Internal Revenue Code subchapter F, which deal with exempt organizations. A common one is Code Section 501c3, which confers a federal tax exemption for charitable organizations. what we're talking about today, and for the purposes of the BNI regulation, it's the state designation for a cooperative, which sometimes is nonprofit and oftentimes is for profit. We're not talking about federal. Okay, next slide. Very slow slides today. Here we go. One tricky thing about the BNI regulation, you may be eligible as a nonprofit, but you must be engaged in a business. And since a business is an activity or trade performed for gain, benefit, advantage, or livelihood, even a co-op labeled as a nonprofit by their state statute is engaged in a business. Co-ops are not formed with the primary goal of being an investment vehicle. Rather, they're formed by their members to gain some sort of advantage. So next slide. So let's see. Some of the unique aspects of cooperative businesses can make it confusing to figure out whether they qualify for different rural development programs. A co-op is formed in part to provide a good or service to its members at the lowest possible cost. The cooperative may have investors, but dividends to those investors are strictly limited. As Margaret mentioned, if there are net profits, they're distributed to members as patronage refunds based on how much a member used the cooperative. Some state statutes describe cooperatives as nonprofit because they're not formed to benefit investors. However, almost all cooperatives operate for a business purpose, provide employment, improve the economic climate, or pay members some kind of patronage, as is required by the BNI regulation. So next slide. So the BNI definition of a co-op has to be owned and operated for the benefit of its members and returns of residual earnings paid to members on the basis of patronage. So how about childcare cooperatives? Do they qualify for the BNI program? They're owned and operated for the benefit of the members, but they're not likely to distribute patronage and money. Child care co-ops and other co-ops that operate on a thin margin benefit their members by retaining the income and using it to make the goods or services provided by the co-op affordable or more high quality. In the case of a child care co-op, members may benefit from reduced tuition, higher salaries, benefits for employees, better facilities, or maybe longer, more flexible hours. So next slide. So what if the cooperative is not organized under a cooperative statute? The BNI regulation makes entities not legally chartered as cooperatives eligible. The cooperative must be owned and operated for the benefit of its members and pay patronage. Cooperatives sometimes are incorporated under a corporation, partnership, limited liability company, or nonprofit statute. The bylaws describe how the business pays patronage based on use, operates by allowing one vote to each member, and limits returns to investors, which are, the earmarks of a cooperative. Nonprofit statutes generally do not permit distribution of earnings. But cooperative statutes where the cooperative is called nonprofit, they do allow distribution of earnings. So next slide. Why would, oops, we jumped ahead.
Sorry, Megan.
That's okay. So why would a co-op incorporate under a non-cooperative statute? There are several reasons. The state enabling statutes might not accommodate the type of cooperative business that the members want to form. It could be that the cooperative wants to operate in a way that the statute doesn't really accommodate. Some co-ops form under the state nonprofit statute because they don't think that they'll earn much and they'll be able to access grants if they are considered a nonprofit. Child care cooperatives are an example of that. They operate on a very thin margin and as a nonprofit may be able to access foundation and other funding. So now I'm going to turn it over to the team of Commongrounds. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just want to take a second and reintroduce because there's a few people that have joined midway. Kate Redman and Andrew Lutz are going to be, they're co-executive directors of Commongrounds Cooperative. We'll also hear from Jeff Hickman, who is the VP of Government Lending for Coastal States Bank, and Lisa Eppel, who is was the BNI specialist that did the behind the works, behind the USDA curtain work for the loan. She works for USDA Rural Development. Turn it over to Kate.
I'll actually hand it right over to Andrew to kick us off here.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Lutz from Commongrounds Cooperative. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We're just going to do an overview here. We are Commongrounds. Our mission is to develop real estate that meets community needs and improves the quality of life for all people in our region. And we do that through our pilot project, which is 414 East 8th Street, a 4-story mixed-use development co-locating workforce housing with tenant-owner businesses focused in our 4 pillar areas of food, family, the arts, and wellness. Next slide. A quick overview of the building. We are 4 stories, 2 floors ostensibly as residential. We operate a workforce housing program that is income qualifying. We run the program ourselves, but we based our area median income tiers and our rents on our MSHDA guidelines, which is our Michigan State Housing Development Authority guidelines for affordable housing. And then we have 2 full floors of commercial tenant owner businesses. We have 7 commercial tenant owners total, and we'll get a little into more about our ownership classes. But we have an early child care center, a Riverside bar, restaurant, and cafe. We have a co-working ecosystem for social enterprise entrepreneurs. We have a nonprofit that does work in transportation and food security. We have a performing arts venue that's a 150-seat state-of-the-art performing arts venue. We have a wellness practitioner who co-locates their office at Commongrounds and also provides our ownership with wellness programming. And did I miss one, Kate?
I think you got everybody.
Okay, that's everybody. And all of these, long-term residential units, we have 5 short-term residential units that we offer to our owners before we offer them to the public. And those, the revenue from that helps kind of cover the gap between market rate and our more affordable rents in our long-term housing program. They're all connected by really comfortable, robust, expansive common area amenities that encourage people to kind of come out of their units and connect. And we also manage several amenity spaces that meet our mission impacts, like our teaching kitchen and a couple of community gathering spaces in the building. Next slide. As a cooperative, we're a non-profit real estate cooperative, so we're subchapter T for anyone who wants to know as far as the IRS is concerned. We have 2 classes of ownership, the commercial tenant owner class, which are those businesses that are actually located in Commongrounds in the 414 East 8th Street doing business here, and then also community owners. So imagine, a grocery co-op. These are almost 1,000 folks from our region and beyond who support us by purchasing just a small equity share for $50, staying up to date on their annual dues, and participating in our programming in those 4 pillar areas of food, family, arts, and wellness. Our board is made up of all of these 2 ownership classes. It's predominantly tenant owner representatives on our board, but we elect 2 community owner representatives at our annual meeting. And then that body of ownership representatives appoint an individual from our residential housing program, and also an individual to represent the river. We are situated right on the banks of the Boardman-Ottaway River in downtown Traverse City, Michigan. And we thought that it would be important for our goal of inclusive stakeholding to have the river represented in our governance. Next slide. So I mentioned at the top that our mission is to meet community needs. So how do we do that? We do that in part between the way we designed our real estate for our community to take advantage of it. We do it through the commercial tenant owner businesses and their missions and impacts, because they're all aligned within our 4 pillars. So we offer workforce housing, which is has been an outspoken need in our community for many years. And we offer childcare, which is also something that our region identified years ago when this project was just sort of a vision of a few key stakeholders. We have an ongoing childcare crunch in our region. A culture of health, food, movement, and connection. We do that through just the products and services that our tenant owners offer our community, but also through our own programming, which we use as a vehicle also to engage our ownership in utilizing the real estate. We have a lot going on, so we've created a lot of jobs. We attract and retain talent year round because we were the vision of the community that lives here year round, even though we are considered sort of a tourist economy. We are situated at the west end of a corridor that our city marked in its master plan for redevelopment into a healthy living corridor. And Commongrounds kind of went first and said, we'll go first and build infrastructure for that on one end. And we attract a lot of different people at Commongrounds. There's a lot of, I mentioned social enterprise, entrepreneurship. Our whole building is filled with visual art through our visual arts program. So we attract a lot of artists. And again, that's all sort of suspended within this expansive common area infrastructure that connects all of these tenant units. Imagine us like we're inside out from a strip mall. So if you're pulling up to the coffee shop but then you're also pulling up to your therapist's office, you're going to enter each individual unit from the sidewalk, right? You just park your car and then you go in the door for the unit you're looking for. At Commongrounds, you come up through the building and you're forced to sort of bounce off everybody who's there for a different reason. That's social infrastructure, that builds social capital, and it's another reason why we are designed the way we are and we operate the way we do. Next slide. Yeah, just an awesome place to be. You got to experience it. If you're in Traverse City anytime soon, text me. I'd love to show you around. We have, we have amenities, we have programmings, and we have products and services that sort of bridge generational gaps. Anytime you come to Commongrounds, you could find, I think there was a picture on the slide of our monumental staircase. You could find my mom, who's 78 years old, taking a coffee meeting on one of those giant steps. with a bunch of toddlers crawling through them and between them to try to get to the top. It's a really special place, and we're excited to be here to tell people about it. And I'll hand it over to Kate for the next slide, which is how did we get here? Oh, one earlier than that one. There we go.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, and great to be here with all of you today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our timeline and then where our money actually came through or came from. So the project really got kicked off in 2018. There were some dreaming before that happened in 2016 and 2017, but we formed the cooperative in 2018 and purchased the land with investment from some local supporters. We really spent that year meeting with the community and different nonprofits and small businesses and the neighborhood to get feedback from what would people like to see in the space, what would they like to be able to walk to in this neighborhood, and what would add to the community quality of life. And that was how we kind of co-designed the building, particularly with the nonprofit and business partners that wanted to be in the space. We started meeting with the wonderful folks at USDA who were very patient with us over the years as we kept developing it, along with the MEDC, which is our State Economic Development Corporation, and other potential lenders. And we did our first community ownership drive where anyone could become an owner for $50. And that was our way of kind of testing. Did people like the concept? Did they like the idea of what we came up with? And we were really amazed by the response that we got. In 2019, we moved ahead with finalizing the building design and the zoning approval. And we also did our first community-based investment crowdfunding where we raised $837,000 from, I think it was 136 investors in that first one, which again, just really surpassed our expectations. You know, at that time, investment crowdfunding was something a lot of people weren't familiar with, and it's still a foreign concept to lots of folks that, you know, you're not just donating money, you're investing it so that you're able to earn a return. And to date, we've done additional crowdfunding rounds, and we have almost 500 investors who together have invested. Let's see, I think we're at 1.4 million altogether. And in that time, we were trying to work with a local credit union for a loan. I saw a question with, are credit unions cooperatives? And that's right, they are. And that's why we were trying to work with a credit union, because we thought it would be a good fit. Although we learned that the size of our loan was just kind of too big for a local credit union to take on relative to their overall portfolio. And we switched to trying to work with national lenders that have larger portfolios and specialized in USDA business and industry loans. Loan guarantees. That's how we ended up connected to Jeff Hickman, who's on the call, who works with a bank that does not have a presence in Traverse City, except that Jeff lives in Traverse City. And, you know, I was meeting with a kind of a real estate financing expert who lives in a town 4 hours away. And he said, you know, you should work with someone who specializes in USDA loans. Hey, doesn't Jeff live in your town? Jeff is the best in the whole state. So it was funny because I knew who Jeff was, but I had no idea that that's what he did for a living. So we connected to Jeff, and Jeff, I think, has the patience of multiple saints inside of him, and was great at working with us. And we're really grateful to him and Coastal States Bank for sticking with it, you know, because it certainly is, you know, a little bit out of the box project. So took a special lending group to work with us. And so through that kind of COVID period of 2020 and 2021, got our financing stack together, which I'll talk about, and were able to break ground. And the building, we partially opened. We were able to move the residential tenants in towards the end of 2022, and then over 2023, our commercial tenants opened. And as of the fall, we're all fully open. So we are up and operating. Oh yes, I put in here too that we had an additional USDA form of support and we received a solar grant and installed solar this year, which was exciting. Next slide, please. So here's the kind of the chart of where did our money come from, which I imagine is something you all are interested in. So our we had an $8 million primary loan from Coastal States Bank, which was where the USDA loan guarantee applied. And, I mean, you folks are probably aware of this since it's what you do every day, but we really could not have done this project without the USDA loan guarantee. It's so important in real estate development to have somebody who can provide that loan guarantee for a lender to work with you. And we would not, we were a bunch of community organizations and organizers trying to make this happen. And we did not have anybody who could have provided a personal loan guarantee in that amount. So it really was crucial for the project being successful that loan guarantee was available. And then we also worked with IFF, who's a CDFI that provided a second mortgage. Started with 1.5 million, but then they increased that to 3 million to help us address some of the increased costs that we had on the project through COVID and inflation. I don't know if you guys know, but there's been a little bit happening in the last couple of years. So like many projects, we encountered delays and increased costs, but we're able to get open with the support of our lenders. So that was, that loan piece is a good chunk. We also had the community owner investment, which includes both the investors that helped us buy the property originally, as well as the investment crowdfunding raises. We used the PACE program, if you guys are familiar. It's kind of an unusual program that has to be enabled by federal, state, and local legislation. And it comes on your property like a special assessment, but it supports specifically green infrastructure, and you work with a third-party lender, but you pay it back as a property tax assessment. We got a little bit of grant support from our local brownfield authority. Our commercial tenants were all required to pay 20% down, and they ended up getting support from additional community investors to help do that. And then we received, last but not least, we received $1.5 million grant from our state economic development corporation, which was also pretty critical to being successful overall. So I know we're going to have lots of time for questions, but there's kind of the quick down and dirty summary of where the money came from for the project. I think that is our last slide. Yeah.
I'm going to stop sharing the slides so we can kind of open it up. Jeff, is there anything that you would like to discuss that was part of the project that folks should know about?
Sure, Debbie. Coastal States Banks has been doing government guaranteed lending for lots of years, but we really were not very adept to the cooperative world. And so when Kate called and this referral came around, it wasn't like I said, yay, the golden goose has arrived. We wanted to put a pause on this and really kind of understand what was going on. And that was not only a conversation in the bank, but also with the USDA, who actually was aware and had been working on the project for a couple of years. And, a few things that struck me right up front from the cooperative standpoint that really helped in the financing side was, one, this groundswell of community support that had been going on for 3 years. They'd raised enough money to buy this piece of property in downtown Traverse City, essentially without any bank debt. It's investor debt, but no bank debt. And the fact that they had almost 600 members at the time was really, really kind of, it got our attention. But even more important was the elaborate and very thorough business plan that they had put together, and that included memorandums of understanding from some of the corporate tenants that were going to become tenants once the building was up and running. All those things were really, really important and part of our conversation. So it was a conversation one day with my bank colleagues, and the next day it was with the USDA, and the next day USDA, and the next day bank colleagues. So it was a continuous process as we moved through this to figure out what our loan number was that we felt comfortable, what the gap was. Let Kate go back to work to figure out how she could fill the gap. And we got there, and it was a great. And I guess the other thing I would say is that from a cooperative management perspective, the officers, Kate included, were very adept at financial stuff and really knew a lot about how to put something together, even though they'd never done it before. A cooperative, this was something that they had done a lot of homework on, knew a lot about it, and really came well informed to the bank. So all that stuff came together to work really well in the end so that we were able to help them out.
Now, I have a question to throw out for Kate and Andrew. Curious how you arrived at the thought of a cooperative model.
I can speak to that one. Well, I'm an attorney by training, and I worked with small business nonprofits and cooperatives. And I was a member of, there's a group out in California called the Sustainable Economies Law Center that really focuses on cooperative development and has provided a lot of thought leadership in the idea of real estate cooperatives specifically. And they have a fellowship program for attorneys that I was a part of. So I was really fortunate to learn a lot from them and kind of bring that idea to Traverse City. And another person who was really involved at the beginning of the project was the owner of a local coffee company that also had been really active in forming coffee buying cooperatives, and is also very familiar with the cooperative model. So between the two of us, we were really pro-cooperative. And, we live in a community that also has a really thriving grocery cooperative that's very beloved, and a very successful rural electric cooperative. So I think also our community was receptive to the idea of a cooperative and familiar with it.
So when you first started, what did you think was going to be the biggest challenge, and what ended up, if not the same, what ended up being your biggest challenge?
Well, I can go, and then I think Andrew should answer too, because I may have different answers. I mean, we were just I guess we didn't talk that much about really the origin, but it was just a group of nonprofits and small businesses really that got together and said, oh, well, let's make a great magical building in our community. And we didn't have real estate development and experience, and we had a lot of good intention and willingness to work hard, but we had a lot to learn. So I think just I'm a lot more empathetic to real estate developers than I was when we started the process, and really understand why it is so difficult to do that this type of real estate development, and it both learning through the financing and what you need to make it reliable and long-term sustainable in terms of financing, but also just managing the building project and getting it all together. So I'd say that just we were really lucky to have found all sorts of partners that were willing to be patient and understand that we were learning and support us in that process. Andrew, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo all of that, and I think to sort of the challenge we tackled right away at the end of 2022 as we started opening up, first to the residential program on the 3rd and 4th floor, and then sort of to the bringing the commercial tenant businesses online, was, there's not a ton of sort of social infrastructure in like outside of public libraries, right? Or shopping malls to like look to for examples of, when you design your common area maintenance costs for your commercial tenants, how do you do it? Because we have all this common area, right, that connects everybody together. And it's not that tricky to figure out who helps pay to support those areas and maintain those areas. But it's tricky when, some people are serving food across those areas and some people are doing childcare pickup across those areas, to kind of figure out how we all work together as a community of businesses all under one roof. So I think that was a challenge when we first started opening that. I'm, proud to say that we've been meeting and figuring it out together. And that sort of groundswell of support that Jeff talked about is still with us and growing. And we have just such an amazing community of owners and people who want to help us figure it out, because we didn't exactly have a cookie cutter to example elsewhere in North America to just sort of like admire and acquire from the entire time.
Nice. Lisa, any advice you would have for groups that are interested in doing something similar in their communities?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, especially if you're going to look at a guaranteed program with the USDA, would be to reach out right away in the early stages. And hopefully Kate and Andrew would agree. I mean, they started working on this with USDA pretty much from the start, as I recall. It was even before I got involved in it, to go through all of the steps, because this was a different project. It was different for us, for a government staff. So we had to do a lot of research on our end to make sure that what they wanted to do met what we were able to do within the confines of our regulations and our programs. So reaching out right away to see if there's any of those hurdles that we can overcome, I think was really, really important. We have some different things in terms of environmental that you have to go through to get a government guarantee, and that's an important step and an important process that every construction project has to go through. So it was important that they got on board with that right away, and we started that process so as not to hold them up too much with that. What we need in terms of financial projections and working with Coastal States Bank, what our agency may ask for sometimes is a little bit different than what a lender would ask for. They had a really good business plan, and honestly, the community support that they had coming into this, I think played a large part. I mean, a lot of community members were supportive in the $50 fee to buy into the cooperative. I know generated a lot of small ownership, so that was important. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is getting involved with the USDA and a lender who hopefully knows something about our programs initially. It is important. It does help the process go smoother.
One of the things that caused us to kind of pick Commongrounds as a project to highlight was the fact that it was a multi-use building, in that you had housing as part of it, which is not something that you typically saw in the B&I program. Can you talk a little bit about how that works and how you made that process work for the co-op?
Yeah, so with our business guarantee programs, we can do multi-use facilities. We can finance those and provide guarantees on projects that have both living space and commercial space. The one big caveat to that is that for a mixed-use property, the commercial space has to generate more than 50% of the business's projected revenue. And so that was one of the things we had to look at when we looked at the projections for Commongrounds, is how much projected revenue is coming in from the commercial space versus the apartment and living space. Now, Commongrounds has, I will call it the long-term apartment space, and please, Kate or Andrew, stop me if I speak out of turn here. But the long-term apartment space, which is workforce housing, it's not designed for ownership housing. It's designed for workforce housing, which is a key criteria as well. And then they also had some units that I will call them more of hoteling type units, because they're very short term. Somebody comes in for a weekend, an artist puts on an event, and they need some space for people to come and stay, or whatever it might be. So that played into it as well. But the commercial space, from our perspective, and how that plays in to the overall finances of the facility, was very important. And I know Kate and Andrew mentioned that they worked with their commercial tenants, and they were on board, right from the beginning of this, and being able to provide those letters of intent that, yes, we're committed to this project. Yes, we're bringing our business to this location. Those were also very important to have as we looked at the financing package for both the USDA side and I know for Jeff's side on the Coastal States Bank side.
Jeff, I would imagine that in a lot of different projects, you don't get a mix between commercial and residential space. Is that, how did that play out inside with the bank?
I think it was okay. You're right. We don't get a lot of mix between residential and commercial space, but I think it was okay. I think part of it I remember Kate and I had a lot of conversations about that mix between the workforce housing and, as Lisa talked about, the hotel units. The hotel units obviously garner a lot more revenue. And as we looked at generating enough income and cash flow to meet all the loan payments, plus leave some left over, that balance was kind of important. But overall, I think it worked out really well, man.
And I'm looking in the chat, and it says, could you talk more about the difference between the common and preferred stock, and what's the minimum investment for preferred stock in the co-op?
Sure. So we have the $50, really the only stock that you purchase is if you buy the $50 share. And where it's of course, every state has their own sort of beast for how cooperatives are structured. And in Michigan, you can form a for-profit cooperative or a nonprofit cooperative or a nonprofit consumer cooperative, which is what we are. And under those, you don't really for the nonprofit corporations, you don't really technically have shares the way you would a business corporation. The act specifically says you're allowed to call them shares, even though they're not quite the same thing. And your voting rights are how you define them. As a co-op, of course, our voting rights are very clear that it's one share, one member, one vote. But so you buy the $50 share, and then to participate in the investment crowdfunding, you had to buy one of those $50 shares and become a community owner. And then the minimum investment, we actually had different minimums in different years. I think it was $500 in the very first raise we did, and then I think $100 in the second raise that we did, because we wanted to make it more accessible to more people. And our median investment has been somewhere around the $2,000 mark. So which was our goal, to get a little bit of investment from a lot of people. And the investment is structured to feel more like a loan, where we pay a preferred return of 6 or 7%, depending on which year you invested. The earlier investors get more of a return. And, if we don't make a profit, you don't get that return in cash. If we make a profit, or if we don't make a profit, then it kind of increases your investment, basically, so that you'll be bought out with that extra amount when investors exit. And it's again a little bit of a strange structure, because we're a nonprofit corporation. In Michigan, they have it called investment certificates, and there's not really a big legal definition around what does it mean that people have investment certificates, but it's treated as an equity investment because people had to be a community owner to invest, but the return to them feels more like a loan. Sorry, I hope that answers the question. I know it's a little bit confusing, just because it's not structured like a business corporation that we're all used to.
Does that answer your question, Kevin? I hope so. I'm going to assume so, since he's quiet.
He had a little bit more to it.
Okay.
He asked, how are the two classes of members treated similarly or differently, like the consumer versus the business? And then he also asked, are all scales of owners, big, small investors, rewarded on the same basis? And you answered that question, Kate, but just wondering about the two different classes of membership.
Sure. Yeah. As a multi-stakeholder cooperative, you define separate rights and responsibilities for each class. So they do look different. So for the commercial tenants, they purchased their unit based on a square footage estimate of how much it was going to cost to build their units. And they had the option to either pay that cost up front or kind of pay a share of our mortgage over time. So it kind of feels like they're paying rent, but they're actually paying a share of their mortgage, and they're building equity over time. And we have common area maintenance, and we call it our camp policy, common area maintenance and patronage. So, in addition to things you would normally collect for common area costs from your commercial tenants, we have other shared costs that they agree to take on. So, for example, this year we added a maintenance man who's a staff person of Commongrounds, but the commercial tenants also share the cost of them to have him perform work in their spaces as well. And we anticipate, that there could be even things like shared marketing costs, or, other things that the commercial tenants see a benefit to having the cooperative coordinate for them to do as a group, for the building as a whole. So technically that's patronage, but we're not aiming to earn a profit on it. And it's, if we earn a profit on it on a given year, it's obvious that we charge too much because we're just passing on the actual cost of providing those services to them. And then our community owners, that is really more about community engagement and participation. We don't have other than the ability to the investment certificates, we don't really have a way that they're purchasing a lot of services from us. They're mostly purchasing things from our commercial tenant owners. So we are actually still working on the patronage policy for them. We're not at a point where we're earning a profit so that we're paying out patronage, but we anticipate finalizing the patronage this year. But we're probably going to base it on engagement. So, how many events or meetings are they coming to in the building? And if we end up earning a profit from the kind of community engagement things that are happening, then we'll redistribute it on that basis. But it's more of an engagement tool than a very traditional, like a grocery co-op, where it's clear that you're buying groceries from the co-op. Oh, I think, sorry, I should have spoke to too that our board representation is another piece. The commercial tenants appoint a majority of our board, and the community owners appoint 2 or 3 representatives. So it is weighted towards the commercial tenant owners, but that's because they have a much bigger financial risk and investment than the community owners.
Curious, what's been the reaction of the community, not just the shareholders that are invested in it, but the other members of the community? What's the scuttlebutt, the rest of the community?
Andrew, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, feedback has been great. I think, we as an organization that operates this real estate on behalf of the community and the ownership, we're still learning everything that people want to use this building for and these spaces for. So a lot of actually our objectives and key results for this year are like putting in place more systems for more robust feedback and input from our ownership and from our community at large, to get even more innovative and creative with how we use the spaces. But since we first opened at the beginning of 2023 and sort of phased in, we're busy. There's a lot of people here doing a lot of really cool stuff. So feedback has been great.
And one of the challenges that you see with cooperatives in general, and I'm imagine in a multi-stakeholder that it's even more intricate, is the communication between the board and the membership. And how did you develop that process, or is that still in process as you're going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was one of the first sort of tools that the original project team for Commongrounds built, was a way to engage ownership, which we affectionately call our early birds. If you peruse our website, you'll find a lot of bird puns, because the original project team was searching for metaphors that weren't like team sports related for how we would describe ourselves as like a staff team, and then also as an organization of stakeholders. And we settled on birds. So the staff is the birdhouse. The community owners are our flock, and we have lots of fun with our newsletters as far as injecting bird puns into them. So this whole project started because of a few key visionaries in the community, Kate Redmond being one of them, asked a non-rhetorical question saying, if we could build anything, where would we build it, and what would be in it? And that took a lot of engagement with the community. And so we've always had a very close relationship with our base of ownership and our audience in that sort of way, because this was a manifestation of what they said we needed in our community. And they're showing up to check in on it and see how it's going, which is great.
Cool. I have a question from Sadiq in Indiana. Is Commongrounds located in a mixed-use district? And could you speak more about zoning? Was there an issue with that?
Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, no, you get it.
We are in a we are in a mixed use commercial district. We and we're mostly uses by right. But meaning that we wouldn't have needed special approval, but just like the sheer intensity of the use and the number of trips required meant that we did have to go through approval by our planning commission. And there were a couple of well, I shouldn't say they're small things, small things, because they still took a lot of time to work through. But they're, our community is very sensitive to building height because we're, it's a small town, and people don't want a bunch of skyscraper feeling buildings. And there was like a requirement that you had to have a setback of 100 feet on your top level of your building, which would have pretty much eliminated our second story of housing. And so we worked with our local community and got that changed for the whole district, not just our property, so that, it's the idea is that the buildings feel shorter than they are because of that setback on the top of the building. It doesn't block out sunlight, but we didn't need 100 feet for that to be effective. We only did 20 feet, and we, worked with some experts to figure that out, and the community was supportive. So there was a little bit of navigating zoning, but, mostly for the most part, what we wanted to do, what was allowed in the district. And the city had invested a lot in a big visioning process for the corridor where we're located. And back when this project started, there was a 5-lane road that traffic moved quickly down, and they envisioned making it feel more like a downtown district that would be walkable and bikeable and had, more placemaking. And between the time we got started and by the time our building was done, the city had done a lot of work and invested a lot of money in reinventing the corridor. And we have these just like world-class pedestrian and bike lanes there, and pedestrian scale lighting, plantings. Just, it's a really great feeling district, and there's been other development as well as us that aligned with that. So that helped a lot with our process with the city, because we were aligning with a vision that they had already.
It sounds like there were a lot of different things going on for how this all got started. Can you talk about what the inspiration was for moving forward with it? Once you kind of came together and said, this is what we want to do, where did you look to as far as how to plan it, how to put your information together for the bank and for USDA?
Yes, we had, so the way back before it was going to be a cooperative, the owner of the local coffee company approached a real estate developer that he knew and said, oh, hey, can you help us do this? And he originally bought the property, and then we bought the property from him. And he kind of gave us the push of saying, hey, you guys don't need me. You can learn how to do real estate development. And he helped mentor us through the process. And we're just also fortunate to live in a community where people help each other. And, because we knew we didn't know what we were doing, we weren't afraid to ask for help. And so, we picked the brains of so many people in our community and got just a lot of community support. So, we found people that were doing real estate development, people that were doing affordable housing, people that were doing construction, people that, just any area that we could think of where we didn't know what to do. I always sheepishly, Jeff, I don't know if I've told you this story before, but the very first time I met with a lender about the project, he said, oh, well, how's your pro forma coming? When can you get it to me? And we said, oh, next week. And then I Googled pro forma after that meeting because I wasn't familiar with the term. I knew how to make a spreadsheet. I just didn't know that it was called a pro forma in real estate world. So we really, we got template pro formas. We got help from people that had done a lot of affordable housing development. So we just really leaned on the expertise of and kindness of a lot of people.
Awesome. Another question. Can you explain participation of the long-term renters regarding membership in the cooperative and representation on the board and/or patronage?
Well, maybe I'll speak to why we structured it the way we did, and then Andrew, you can talk about how they're participating. So, we were really torn on whether or not to make the long-term renters have equity in the space, because of course we love the idea of as a cooperative of being able to give folks equity, but we also really wanted to make the units affordable, and we couldn't make the numbers work to both give equity and make them affordable. And the housing demand study in our community at the time showed that there was a bigger demand for rental units than for units units to purchase their own. So we prioritize making them affordable, but having them be rental units. But we still wanted to make sure residents had a voice in governance. So that's why they, still have a voice on the board. But Andrew, do you want to talk about resident engagement?
Yeah, we do have, joining up to become a community owner of Commongrounds as a requirement to rent one of the units at Commongrounds. And then essentially what we have is sort of like an orientation process that teaches the residents as they're coming in kind of about the co-op governance and how they're now stakeholders in the organization and in the building. And we have lots of sort of feedback conduits set up and input conduits for them to like participate in not only the programming that happens downstairs in the commercial levels, but also in improving their experience on the residential floors. And the appointment is something that, we just felt passionate about. So we basically kind of comb through resident meetings and take interest in nominations for the board appointment and then present those to the board. And then, the board at the annual meeting appoints one of the residents to serve on the board. As far as patronage is concerned, it's a similar, they are in our community owner class. So Kate spoke a little bit about that being sort of an engagement tool. Unfortunately, we're not we're not rolling in profits from our workforce residential housing rents. So there's not much actual patronage to pay out there, but did that help answer anything?
Thanks, so. I have another question here that is there a reason why this project or a similar one couldn't be, just disappeared. Where did it go?
Debbie, want me to read it?
Yes, please, because half of it just disappeared.
Yeah, Brian Wilson asks, is there a reason why this project or a similar one couldn't be completed from a USDA guarantee standpoint if the borrower was a for-profit entity? Is this only applicable to a cooperative? So maybe Lisa's the best person to answer that.
Yeah, so the answer to that is no. There's no reason why it couldn't be completed from a USDA perspective. For-profit, nonprofit, cooperative. We lend to many different business types, right? I think a big part of this when you get into the mixed use development, which I mentioned before, because this has the apartment style housing, long-term rentals and the commercial space, is that definition that at least 50% of the business's projected income has to come from the commercial or the business use, not the residential use. So that's a big component of it, but no reason why a for-profit business couldn't do something similar from the guarantee perspective.
Yeah. But we liked it because it was a co-op project.
Yeah.
I'll just be honest upfront. Any other questions?
Something else that I realized
Sure,
I didn't say that might have been helpful in the presentation too. Other than just getting the loan guarantee itself, which was really helpful for the project, another component that made a huge difference for us was having the 30-year amortization. Because, typically a commercial lender, it would have been a 10 or 15 or 20-year amortization, but because of the USDA loan guarantee, we got a 30-year amortization, and that, the project just wouldn't be affordable to the tenants, to us or to the tenants, if we had a shorter amortization period. So that's another really great component that I would encourage you guys to lean on lenders and make sure that the borrowers know is available to have the longer amortization period for the loan.
Mm-hmm. Now, is that something that is a direct result of the guarantee, Jeff? Or would that be something that you would typically have done without the guarantee?
No, it's related to the guarantee for sure.
Okay, that's what I thought. Robbie? Question?
Yeah, and I know there were some questions in the chat that maybe some people hadn't seen, and if we wanted to read them and give the answers. And I know, Kate, you were a guest, you wanted a copy of the recording. If you could put your email in the chat, that way we have it to be able to send to you. Thanks.
I'm trying to find the ones that I haven't done already. Copy, copy, copy.
Do you want to, folks whose questions haven't been answered, you want to raise your hand and we
Yeah.
could call on you?
That's probably the easiest way. Sadiq? Do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
I have a question regarding the ownership.
Mhm.
Do you have to live in Traverse City to be part owner or whatever? Like, is that a requirement?
No, it's open to anyone. You can become a community owner if you would like to. It is, we certainly are very disproportionately weighted towards people that live in Traverse City or, you know, come here for the summer or are familiar with the community, but it is open to anyone.
All right, thank you.
Any others?
I think I saw a question pop up at the very beginning about the PACE financing. So I can say just a little bit more about that. That is, there's federal enabling legislation for PACE, but your state also has to have adopted legislation that allows it, according to how the property taxes work in your state, and also your local government has to have adopted it if property taxes are dealt with by your local government. So it is, you know, if you Google PACE commercial assessment, you can find out a lot about it. But in some states it's very popular and it's all over the place, and in other states it hasn't taken off at all. So it is a very geography based program. But it's, you know, for us, it definitely filled a gap that would have been difficult to fill it another way.
Margaret, you have a question?
Yes, we have, I'm with USDA Rural Development, and we've had a lot of interest in what you have been doing at Commongrounds Co-op in Traverse City. And what words of advice would you have for other communities that are thinking about taking on a project like this? If you had to do it over again, what would you do the same and what would you do differently?
We change nothing. No, I'm just kidding. we learned a lot, and this is what I'll answer that having Andrew answer to for sure. I think that I would say we have had a lot of municipalities reach out to us, you know, and say, oh, we have this plot of land that we'd love to see have developed for this community use. And I will say that I think having that the nonprofits and the commercial tenants lead the project was actually a really effective way to do that, because, you know, we all had skin in the game and wanted to see it happen. And the nonprofits and businesses were connected to what was happening in the community and already had existing customer bases or, you know, community engagement. So I think it's a good strategy if you're like, oh, how do we make a magic building happen on a vacant property, to try to find, you know, to get the people involved that are actually going to have to run the building and run what's happening in the building, and support them in leading it if you can. And I will say, I think a good lesson learned for us that we're still working on now is that, you know, we really got the project done without any philanthropic help. You know, we got the grant from the State Economic Development Agency, but otherwise we have the community investment and we have loans. But I think for us with this project, because it's such a, you know, our tenants are all trying to meet community needs and we're trying to meet community needs, that for us to be really long-term financially sustainable, we want to have more of a philanthropic component, because, you know, that is just how you meet those costs. So we're still working on that piece, but I think that's just in terms of lesson learned, that was a good one for us. But I think it certainly has been a long road and we've learned a lot, but it is also, you know, possible to do this in your community and to want to kind of take ownership and say, what do we want to have in our community and how can we make it happen? And encouraging people to do it is not completely crazy. It's possible. It just takes a lot of hard work.
Thank you for that. If I could ask that same question to both Jeff and Lisa, we're seeing a lot of interest in this model in Traverse City. What advice, Jeff, would you have, and Lisa as well, from a lending perspective?
Well, I'll go first, Lisa. From a lending perspective, I think I mentioned it earlier on. The support of the project by the community is really critical for a project like this. Really, really important. And that they've not only supported by saying, yeah, I like this project, but also got on board by writing a check. They became owners, if you will, on the project. That said a lot about the strength of the project itself. And then, Lisa had said it earlier, and she's going to say it again, and that is having the conversation with both a lender and the USDA early on is really, really important. You got to be able to allow more time than you think you need to make sure it can all happen by your time frame.
Yeah, 100%. I echo what Jeff had to say for sure. Early involvement. I think one of the things that probably made this particular project so successful is the $50 community membership. It's maybe a little bit different than some other cooperative structures where you're investing a lot of money for use of the facility and things like that. I think the $50 community membership for this project was really big in terms of getting that ground root support to move this project forward. And just in terms of financing, the other thing I noticed when I got involved in this project, which I don't recall how long it had been in our hands at the USDA before I got involved. There was a retirement in the middle and things like that. But I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, I know. The diverse board and group. I mean, Kate had a legal background. There were people with finance, all of those things that came together, the real estate development that Kate had mentioned, all of those people coming together in their diverse backgrounds, I think helped put this project together easier because they, as a group, had the expertise to lean on. And like Kate said, she wasn't afraid to ask questions to different people. It wasn't one person trying to put this very large plan together and then sell it to the community. It was everybody working together to make it happen. And I think that was very important, even from our USDA guarantee financing perspective.
Andrew?
Yeah, no, I would definitely lean on like the second half of what Kate said from like a paperwork perspective as far as getting the project built and in the ground, and then ongoing is engaging from a nonprofit perspective, engaging philanthropy early on. If I could personally, in my part in the project, do anything differently, I think it would have been getting further out in front of making sure that like we were planning for and funding like the systems and the technologies that were going to make our real estate really accessible to this large group of community supporters. We didn't have low voltage in our base bid financing. So access control for doors so that members could come and go without having a staff member there to hold it open for them the entire time. We caught up eventually, but we weren't out in front of any of that stuff. And so I would have done that differently. I would have thought about, how do we get everyone access to this building, and is it accessible for all of our really diverse demographics of stakeholders? And what can we do to make it even more accessible?
Can you talk a little bit about, I heard you say, Kate, that, this was a long process, from start to finish. So how do you keep that momentum going? I mean, you had folks from the community but then as it takes longer and longer for the building to appear, how do you keep people excited about it and that momentum moving and the process continuing?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I, I think that's an area that we probably would learn and try to do better in just setting expectations up front. Because, we genuinely believed that we were 6 months from breaking ground for the first 3 years. So I think now we could just be a lot more realistic in timeline when we talk to the community. And, we did get someone just told me the other day, kind of jokingly, like, I'd hate to see a good pandemic go to waste. And I think that, it did help us too, that the pandemic happened it caused some delay, but also everyone was more patient with everything, right, during the pandemic, and people understood that was causing some delay as well. Although we certainly would have, it still took us a lot longer, even if the pandemic hadn't happened, than we originally thought, just because of all of the moving pieces. But we just tried to keep the communication going, and there was stuff continuously happening. There was no point in the project where we were just sitting and waiting for something to happen. So we just, tried to tell the stories of what was happening and keep people updated and feeling engaged. But I do think that there were definitely points in the project where people in the community were like, what's going on, and when is this going to happen? And we would try to listen for when we were hearing a lot of that feedback, to try to get the word out about that it was still happening and we were still working on it. I should say too that, for people that aren't familiar with real estate development, it feels like a really long time. But I do notice that whenever I tour people that work in real estate development, they're like, wow, you guys got this done fast. So it's all a matter of perspective.
It is. It depends on which side of that fence you're on as to how fast you feel it's going. Yeah. And then I have another question here were there any issues with brownfields?
We were a brownfield site, but not a severe brownfield site. We were just a little bit dirty. So I think, I can't remember. There was something there like 60 years ago that was a use that had a little bit of contamination. So we did, of course, had to do the baseline environmental assessments, and we have some brownfield TIF funding, which I know not every state treats that the same way. So that may not mean anything to some people on the call, but basically we have some support from the local and state government to help cover those environmental costs. And we had a small upfront grant from our brownfield authority to help cover it. But yeah, it wasn't, other than that, it's always difficult to work through any kind of environmental issue. It wasn't too severe, and it was a vacant lot when we got it. So also, it was a matter of soil cleanup, not, digging out way buried underground storage tanks that had been leaking contaminations for decades or anything like that. Okay. I will say one interesting, well, I don't know if it's that interesting, although maybe to this group, but we were able, the brownfield TIF in Michigan, you can use brownfield money to support underground parking. And so our building has underground public parking, which that's expensive to do. And it probably would have been difficult to justify without the TIF funding. So that was a big benefit to us, that the state had actually pretty recently expanded the definition of what you could use brownfield TIF money for, to include public parking.
Nice. Well, we've got a few minutes left. If there are other questions. If not.
You see that one, Kate, from Margaret? Are you entertaining another project for the co-op?
I was afraid to ask that one.
Sorry.
I'm afraid of the answer. Let's see what it says.
I think we do feel like we've learned so much about real estate development, that we do like the idea of doing more projects, probably, separate projects that maybe have a shared umbrella of services, but we want to make sure that this project is successful and up and standing before we do that. But another couple of years down the road, but yes, we do like the idea of doing more mixed use, mixed income, community owned development.
What would you recommend if somebody were looking at this type of a development, but rather than building from ground up, you're looking at purchasing an existing building? How do you feel that would differ from what you tried?
I think that the process would really be pretty similar. I mean, of course, you'd have some more sources of funding that we didn't have available, and maybe some other ones that would be more challenging. But I think that really the visioning, what does the neighborhood want and need, who will be in the building, how will you operate it, how do you figure out the numbers? I think that a lot of it would look pretty similarly. I haven't done a project where you renovate an existing building, so maybe I'd have a different answer if I had.
Maybe that's
but I
the
will
next
say,
project.
yes, I do think, our community, we also have an old state mental institution that has been totally renovated to be condos and commercial, and it's a really cool community. And the developer of that project helped us a lot and gave us a lot of advice along the way. And I do think there's a lot of there's a lot of empathy and similar challenges, mostly in just having a mixed income development that's really focused on creating a sense of community from people in the space, and what the challenges that come up from that.
Any parting words of wisdom for those folks out there who are now inspired to go off into their communities and do this type of a project, or start talking about these kinds of projects? Quiet.
Yeah, I think I mean, a concept we leaned on a lot that we haven't actually talked that much about is inclusive stakeholding was a phrase that we used a lot, of just trying to make sure the people that are affected by what you're doing are included in the process. And somehow, it doesn't mean that everything's a popular vote where everybody votes on everything. It just means that you create a way to listen and, to design something and then show it to people and say, okay, does this do what you were hoping it would do? And, that was really key to us in thinking about how being a cooperative, how is our board structured, even how our funding was structured. That was why we did the community investment crowdfunding, was so that the people taking the financial risk in the project were the same people that we were hoping would benefit from it. And if we run into financial issues down the road, that we can go to those folks and there'll be a direct tie to them in their investment and the financial and quality of life benefit that they're receiving. So I think, just in doing kind of community development, it can be, takes more time, it takes patience, it takes a lot of communication. But I think to do this type of project that's really, you want the community to engage in and really participate in, that using that inclusive stakeholding is a really great way to get people engaged in your space, and to make sure you're designing what they actually want.
Anyone else?
Here's a question from Kevin. If this type of project were not in a USDA eligible location, are there corollary guarantee programs in other parts of the federal government, such as HUD? And Jeff, you might be the most aware.
I am not. Maybe Lisa knows.
Unfortunately, I do not know the answer to that question either.
And I will say I don't really know either, but I do know that somebody, I'm trying to remember who it was using our project as an example to try to lobby to extend the USDA program to urban areas, which would make me suspect that it's not available in other ways.
Does anybody else from USDA on the line know of any other programs?
I believe HUD does have some, they call them mortgage insurance programs for cooperatives. Their numbers, and I can't remember the numbers. I'm trying to search the web to find them. But I believe they have some as somewhat similar, possibly.
I don't remember what the numbers are, and I don't know that they're even funded at this point. They may be one of those that is still on the books but unfunded.
Terry Lewis, are you still on the line?
That was going to be my question.
Yeah. I don't want to put her on the spot. She may not be there anymore.
Oh, I'm here. It took me a minute because I was searching the web. New Markets tax credits used to finance the mixed-use developments.
That's right.
I don't know if there's anything left there, and I was looking at HUD. There's certainly HUD, well, they're HUD loan guarantee programs, but the interest subsidies are by and large gone. Their advantages tend to be a very long amortization period, fully prepayable loans, and no balloon payments. So those are really good things that help make real estate affordable. One of the things that cooperative housing has done over the years with respect to Section 216 pass-throughs of mortgage and interest deductions on your individual income tax return, that is now not so necessary, has been to have one overarching ownership structure in which there are two ownership entities, and one would be the residential space, and the other would be the residential owners who own the commercial space, right? So that the investment income from the commercial space passes through to the residential owners, right? But the balance of residential and commercial is within acceptable unit balance with respect to the personal income tax deductions. All of that is, I don't know if there's anything perfectly analogous here at the moment. But there are certainly things that that are usable, right? And I would guess that, for example, Mishta would probably have. Oh, there you go. See, I'm talking and you're Googling. Yeah, community development block grant funds can be used for this too, but that depends on the presence of a CDC and the particular state use of the program and so on and so forth. That's my best answer at the moment.
Thank you, Terry. Well, I see we have about 3 minutes left, and I do want to let you know that if you've joined us midway through or haven't heard it already and you would like a copy of the presentation or in the recording, put your email address in the chat and we'll be sure to get that to you. Also wanted to mention at the end of the PowerPoint, there's a link to a really, really exciting, I think, video of Commongrounds that their local tourist department did. And it features, you can see some of the spaces in action and you can see the people. It's really cool. So you'll have a link to that too, and you can take a look at that and decide where you'd like to do one of these in your community. And with that, I want to say thank you to our presenters. I appreciate your time today and your insights and your ability to kind of spark an aha for folks as they go back to their communities and look at spaces that might work for something like this. So, thank you. And have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.